Like I said, I'm going to be very quick here, but there are a couple of things I want to say. First of all, please silence your devices. I'm going to silence mine. It's courteous to our speakers and panelists. Okay, I have two slides that I want to, and really just a couple of points that I want to make. First of all, that the world of collaborative software, open source software, shared source software is very confusing to people who are not engaged in it deeply. The reason is there's so many organizations, so many projects. If I put every equivalent project on here, we'd have something that looked like a Pontilius painting with many, many dots you couldn't read. So there are thousands of projects, there are hundreds and hundreds of organizations. It's very confusing kind of landscape, so don't be surprised if you don't get the gist of it right away. One way I think of getting a framework for it is to say, if I'm looking at a particular dot in that constellation, what is the deliverable? Is the organization delivering a standard? Are they delivering code? Are they delivering code and community? Are they delivering a service or product? What is it? And that's one way to look and try to characterize the other, or the landscape, if you will. Now, in my second slide of two, I would say and posit that there are really three layers or really constellations of services that all kinds of software, industrial software especially, needs, regardless of whether it's an open source project or a proprietary project that's delivered by a supplier. So I'm making these as layers, but really they are constellations. Think of them as sets of services. And I've grouped them into three sets. The first set is governance. So governance really covers the way, the rules by which the software is developed and commercialized. In the open source world, that's done primarily through foundations, although it can be done by individuals. The second layer is really the collaborative layer, or the collaborative constellation. And that's where people really work together to develop the code itself and the applications and roadmap them. And the third layer is commercial. So in the commercial layer, we're dealing with products and not really projects. And the commercial layer is where individual IP and other services are added. So let me fill this in with some examples of the types of services. For instance, at the governance layer, everybody has a governance layer. Even if you're doing a project within a single company, take some code out and get it stolen, and you'll find out you have governance. You have licensing, you have other kinds of services like legal services. At the collaboration layer, you have things like building the core capabilities of the application, building the roadmap, managing versioning, and so forth. At the competitive layer, you have things like proprietary IP, probably a key part, project management, versioning, integration with legacy, integration with other open source or components. And so in a way, not all of those things have to fit in a particular layer, and I've made some of the decisions I made here are a little bit arbitrary. But think of those three constellations of services that all types of software in industry are going to need. And let me take an example now. The 600-pound gorilla in the open source world these days for the last few years has been Kubernetes, which is a orchestration platform for distributed applications that are containerized. That's what that project is defined as. So let's look at what happens in this case, at those three layers. The governance is done by a foundation, as I said, and I will offend some people from Eclipse by putting a cloud native one, but to some of us, all these foundations have a similar role in that they are doing governance of these kind of projects. The advantage that they bring, and at Eclipse having hundreds, they manage hundreds of these projects, is that they can provide shared services and best practices across all of those projects to some degree. At the collaborative layer for Kubernetes, it's being done by working groups within that team. And the point to make here is that that is a collaborative effort, so it's innovative, but it's not competitive. In other words, there's no differentiation between anybody's implementation at this layer. That is a standardization that's enforced through code and compliance. But at the competitive layer, there are all kinds of commercial products that build on and add to the open source capability. In fact, you could take off Kubernetes yourself and run it, but no one really in his right mind would try to do that in an enterprise. The value added for these kind of products, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens of them, is integration, ease of use, all kinds of other applications. So we see the VMwares, the Red Hats of the world, the IBMs of the world, and many other startups providing commercial products that people actually buy based on these open source technologies. So my 2 points again, the landscape is very, very confusing if you're not familiar with it. And second, there are 3 constellations of services that all software is going to need and has, and that is governance, collaboration, and commercialization. Okay, that's my pitch. Now, I'm going to turn the floor over to Alice Zoidel, who is a professor at Johannes Kepler University and one of really the founder or father of the Fortiac IE61499 software. So Alice, please.
Thank you. I'm flattered to be here today because Eclipse Fortiac is my baby. I started that, or it was a crazy idea of 2 PhD students going in a tram in Vienna 17 years ago. And now I'm here in that room with all of you presenting Eclipse Fortiac to you. So what is Eclipse Fortiac? As I put it here, Eclipse Fortiac is a reference implementation for 4099. And with that, I mean you get everything to try out Eclipse Fortiac. So what we have is a full-fledged implementation. We have a tool called Fortiac IDE. We have a runtime called Fortiac Forte. And you get everything that I show you today on our website. So you see here it's since 2015 an Eclipse project under the Eclipse public license. Harry was already talking about licensing as a topic. I put here the key facts is that you can use it in products, you can commercialize it, but for more, I would hand over to Frederick. He can much better explain the Eclipse public license than I can do. So, to show you a little bit, key features of Fortiac IDE, you see here all major elements of IEC 61499 you can use. On the very left side, you see the application editor, the system editor, managing projects, also very big projects. We are evaluating here really, really large projects currently. In the middle, you see function block editing, interface editing, but also structured text. I will come to that also, why I find that very important. And state machines or debugging your blocks so that you can really develop. But a tool is nice, but in our world, we are control engineers, so we need to interact with the real world. So what I have for you is also the Fortiac Forte, which is, I always call it an hardware system abstracting runtime environment. It's rather modular, written in C++ for the techies in the room, and available for already quite some devices. So you see here a list. One of the latest that we added is PLC Next from Phoenix, where we have now a first support, but other devices would also be possible. And as you see, we have many different operating systems. So if you have a device and think Eclipse Fortiac should run on that device, talk with me. We most probably find a solution for that. So this was my advertisement pitch, and now going further. So 4099 is a lot about communication. Communication between devices, but also communication with higher levels. Therefore, from the beginning, Eclipse 40 and 40 Forte was about how we can better communicate. And so what we already have now is we have direct integration with MQTT using Eclipse Power, which is utilized to send data to brokers, to the cloud, to edge, whoever you want to. Another thing that I highlighted here, because it's also a very nice open source project, and I hope that someone from Open 62541 would also be here. We have OPC-UA integration, and a very deep OPC-UA integration, where you can utilize some OPC-UA features like method, like programs that are really, really interesting for sequence control. You see here a picture of a real machine. This machine was developed by 25 different vendors. This was a concept done by the VDMA to show how OPC-UA can be used to integrate in discrete manufacturing. So for the process engineers, this would be small MTPs connected together. We were really proud. We were with Eclipse 40 in two modules of that machine, and with Open 62541, we were able to get everything together. Upcoming also, interesting for some of you, I've currently a student doing his bachelor thesis, bringing DDS support to 40. We have a prototype where our runtime speaks Kafka. So you could take Kafka directly from the PLC to the cloud. So everything Kafka if you want to. And Eclipse Unite, the production performance management protocol, is also a student that's currently working on that. Good. So one thing that I like to present, especially in that room here, is to talk about what potentials we have with Eclipse 40. And one thing that, especially in my person, I'm also the convener of the 4099 working group in TC65B. I'm also using 40 to explore. One problem that we have, at least with customers I'm talking, is that the software development effort for machine controls is way too high. And 4099 can help that. We have scientific proofs of that, but still we are limited. And we would like to push the boundaries, and with Eclipse 40 we can show that live. So you see here a few things that most probably will be in one of the upcoming 4099 editions, like untyped sub-applications to make your development flow easier, simple function blocks for simplified functionality, and something that I find very important is how to better utilize 1131. Many people always say this is 4099 here, 1131 on the other side. This is not true. 4099, if you look into the spec, is building on 1131. So there is no 4099 without 1131. And therefore we need, and there is lots of stuff written about that, but sometimes only between the lines. And with Eclipse 40, we try to show other tools are doing that as well. So this is not a bashing of tools, it's just here we would like to show and also identify what we need to write down explicitly, because sometimes it's really written between the lines in the specifications, and that's not good. So I gave you a tool, I gave you a runtime. I showed you how the standard will evolve. However, the best standard, the best programming language is nothing if we don't have usability. Over the last 3 days or 2.5 days, I don't know how often I heard the topic user experience, usability. And our people, our workforce, our engineers are changing. I found this very nice picture on Twitter. So why should I learn something? Why do I need to go to training? With my mobile phone, I don't need to do that. I just can click around and find it out. And this is where we have to go with our tools. And therefore, for now 7 years or so, we are investigating how can we assess and evolve usability of our tools. And I'm not sure if the person is in the room, but the person who pointed me to that topic is at the conference here. It's Thomas Hadlich. At that time, he was at the University of Magdeburg. And he told me a very nice story at one of the conferences. So he did a study. He took 30 students, put the 30 students into 2 groups of 15, and gave the students a task to program. And 2 tools. One tool was Eclipse 40, the other one was a commercial 1131 PLC tool. Then the first group of students first got Kodiak, then the commercial tool. The other group first the commercial tool, then Eclipse Kodiak. And both got a time limit for doing both exercises in the two tools. And after that, the assessment showed that with 4099, with Eclipse Kodiak, the student achieved in the same time more, in a higher quality. So yeah, I was happy, 4099 for the win. But, and now comes the big but, is all the students in the questionnaire afterwards said they liked working with the commercial tool more. So we have evidence that we get better code, more code in the same time. At the same time, the people, the engineers are not happy. So this is bad. And therefore, we started now an assessment. You see here one process that we did also during Corona. We did that remotely because we are researchers. We don't have the big money. And we came up with quite some improvements. This is a picture that will be published in a scientific journal this or next week, showing certain things to improve 4019, Kodiak. And one thing is a combination of tooling and new standard features. And this is the untyped sub-application, which is really, really helping to proceed, to speed up your developments. We have one user of Kodiak who got the task of restructuring and designing a bigger part of the control architecture system. And this guy said, I should first do an architecture. So he went to a drawing program and started to draw a software architecture for the system. And then, step by step, he tried to implement the architecture. Very soon he found out that with Eclipse Kodiak, he can do the architecture at the same time doing the coding. So doing a structured approach of developing the software, developing an architecture, and then immediately have the result and not have to do work twice. And I think this is exactly what tools have to be about. They have to help us. They have to reduce the effort that we, as control engineers, anyhow have. Software is really big and complicated. Good. So to also show you what people have done with Kodiak, I compiled a few slides as introduction also for Roberto. And I put here a few names of people who have used Eclipse Kodiak or are using Eclipse Kodiak. So this is not that they used it in commercial products. Some did it in internal research projects, sometimes in external research projects, in assessments, in real products. But that's the point here is that with Eclipse Kodiak, it's very, very easy to just download the software, try it out, and do your experiment. So the slide you see here is from Steve. He presented that, I think, 3-4 years ago, exactly in this room or somewhere in the rooms here, showing an interoperability between Eclipse Kodiak and at that time, Next Control. Also, what I'm very proud of, nearly every university in the world who is at least looking at 4099 is also using our software. This is nice. To show you a little bit more concrete, I have here a real-time middleware, Xentara, from a Munich startup called Embedded Ocean. They integrated Kodiak Forte into their middleware because they are networking machines, and they also would need to do machine controls in that. So you see here an example. It's very hard for looking around and without laser pointer. So this is a picture on the right side from their booth. So you see control devices, you see IOs, you see a robot, and this was controlled by Eclipse Kodiak running on the Xentara middleware. And with that, they tried to improve how machines can be implemented and networked. And another example, which I'm also very proud of, and it's really fun, because I never have thought of that Kodiak could be used there. So this is a thing, very new. The picture that you see here on the right is from last week. This is a live picture from the farmer who owns the equipment. So this is a slurry tank that has automation inside to better distribute the slurry on the fields. And there, a company, HR Agrartechnik, together with a school in Munich, developed a control solution based on some open controllers and Eclipse Kodiak. So, and that's just a few examples. I think one thing, and with that I'm on the end, one thing that you have to know about open source is that I don't have control. I don't know who is using Kodiak. The examples that I brought here to you is just examples that people who are talking with me. There may be hundreds out there that I didn't know. So the next speaker that I may introduce them before. I just noticed because you wrote me an email and then we got into discussions. And with that, I thank you. I hope you enjoyed my talk. If not, then at least I have here a poem written in the style of Goethe by ChatGTP and my colleague Bianca Wiesmeyer. Thank you.
So good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to present today some use cases of some open sources, but mostly about 4DIAC in our company, where we also develop some kind of technologies for advanced process control, real-time optimization that we run on the edge through 4DIAC, okay? So first of all, I would like to say that open source software gives us the opportunity to make some things very astonishing. So that's why we are making impossible possible, okay? And in our vision, we want to create the industries of the future, okay, through applied sciences. So there's a lot of scientific things that we can bring from the university, and then we can bring from the industry, and then we would like to take it from one industry and bring to another, take it from the university and apply it on the industries, okay? And our values, we want to make it happen with a clear purpose, okay? We have purposes in our company and we focus on that. And we do it in an ethical way and we form people. This is very important to us to form people because we understand that professionals of the future, they might be formed today. And not all the time people are doing that or thinking about that. And sometimes you can do that inside universities, but you also can do that inside companies, and that's what we do, okay? So this is who we are. We have a young team. I mean, I'm not the youngest person there. Maybe I'm the oldest one. And this is a good point about doing open source because some people get scared about what we're doing because we're putting people with 20 years old, 21, 22 years old, doing the full advanced process control in an industry, real-time optimization, and we teach these people inside our company, and this is working well, okay? So how complex is it to go inside a big company, a big industry, and start taking data-driven decisions, okay? So in 6 years, that's what we could do. We are inside British American Tobacco. We are inside Raízen, which is a joint venture between Shell and a Brazilian company for sugarcane, alcohol, and sugar, of course. And we're doing in logistics with VLI. It's a big company in Brazil, invested by Mitsui, invested by Brookfield, by Vale, and Dairy Partners Americas, among others, okay? So how to face the biggest engineering and consultancy companies in the world and how to deal with the biggest clients in the world. Okay, well, we do it all the time and we are confident that we know exactly what we are doing. Okay, it's not an adventure to us. We are experienced guys and we are teaching people and we are passing our experience to our employees, okay? So basically, we are the unique industrial full-service company in Brazil, based on software, hardware, plus consulting. What is the IMRIM world? Henry was talking about there's a lot of projects, and these are the projects that we are using right now, okay? Maybe there are one or another more, but we are using these projects right now. Some of them for digital twin, for example, Modelica, we have some way to totally model a plant and commission on the model the advanced control and the real-time optimization, check results before, and then deploy it on the field, okay? And 4DIAC, of course, so a lot of solvers. And basically, we do that to make data valuable. So industry generates a lot of data, and you shall know what to do with this data. Okay, so advanced control is something you can do with the data to take some kind of decision. Real-time optimization, of course, is another kind of decision you can do. But also, industry shows more needs than that. For example, when somebody says that you're going to use advanced control and you're going to have some return over the investment, and then the guy wants to know what is the return. Okay, so advanced controls reduces variability. So how can you take variability reduction and show to your client the way the return they will have by variability reduction? Okay, we can do that through data analytics. Okay, but we can do that also with another kind of physical digital twins. And also real-time optimizations. It's a kind of decision that you can take with your data, okay? So you're always needing data. And we also have some technologies about sensors. We developed some intelligent sensors where we collect some fundamental data, and with this fundamental data, we send it to the cloud and make some scientific calculations, and then we bring back some relevant results to the client. Also, we have some, for manufacturing, intelligent recommendation systems. And when the recommendation, it's not a recommendation anymore, but it can be an output of advanced control or optimization, then you have the full capacity planning that we are deploying right now in the second generation ethanol, okay? So our company is not about software, hardware, and open source. Our management, it's kind like open source, okay? Because we don't have a very straight hierarchy inside our company. So it's something we have to deal to make this model of a company. If I can, I could say that our company is like a copycat of a university laboratory that we brought to the market, okay? And now we have some things closed, then we can scale the model. So it's not about the model of the software, it's not about the technology, but it's also about management, okay? So we have a very strong culture, and that's something that we don't open, we don't give up about our culture, okay? It's very strong to us. So I'll show you some step-by-step examples here. First of all, it's important to see that we deploy our technologies on the field with the technologies on the edge. Why? Everybody was telling here yesterday and the other day that there is a problem, integration IT with OT. Okay, so imagine the scenario that you go to a client and just say, I have here a hardware, okay, it's a single board computer, and it's embedded with a real-time optimization. Then you're gonna plug in your code generation system, you're gonna have an optimization and advanced control, and you don't even need to talk to IT people, okay? So people used to like it. Of course, at some time, you need to make things better and talk to IT people. But you have the opportunity to start generating value before you solve the problems between IT and OT. And this is only possible because we use it for the act. It was a strategy to us when we decided to find something that does what 4DAC does. And hopefully we found 4DAC. We deployed 4DAC inside the hardware. And 4DAC allows you to build blocks. So we have, but the blocks, they can be, for example, written in low-code language, such as Fortran, C++, C. And then you close this small block, deploy it in the hardware, and bring the hardware to make what it has to do, for example, in terms of advanced control in a facility. So what's the point? For an employee from IMRIM, a very young guy or girl there, what they have to do? They have to link blocks and put play. Then it's working, okay? So I have deployed an advanced control in 3 days, and I have deployed a real-time optimization in 30 days. I think it's fast, okay? And I don't even need to talk to IT people. So this is the basic architecture, and some results from Raízen, the joint venture between Shell and Brazilian group. Mean reduction of variability of 35%, fuel consumption 5.1% in 15 power plants, okay? The mean efficiency increased in 3%, and they published it on the newspaper a return of 100 million Brazilian reais, which means around $25 million in one year, okay? And with these results, we became the partner of this company. And we are present on their ESG report because they are an open company, okay? So more detailed results on each facility that we were in 2020. Now we are in 15, okay? So the second case, it's the biggest manufacturer of tobacco in the world. They have a facility in our city in Uberlândia in Brazil. So the architecture is the same, but the point is that the first process we're going to deal with them, it was drying section of tobacco, and they used gas as fuel, okay? So we became a little bit aware about that because it's a bit more dangerous to deal with gas. So what we did first to this client, we generated a lead to predict the savings for this guy. So we expected an efficiency increase of 6% and then a variability reduction of 30%. And then the client said, okay, move forward. So we modeled the process of these guys, and we have experience on modeling engineering problems from CFD, for example. We have our own CFD software that came from my PhD. But CFD sometimes doesn't pay the bill, and we need to do things faster to the market, okay? So we started a 0D modeling of processes, okay? So we did this model of this process, the digital twin. After we did the digital twin, we deployed the technology, the advanced control, and the real-time optimization in the model, okay? Then we could check what will happen with our digital twin, with our advanced control, and with our real-time optimization in the model. So here are some results. There we use it in MPC, but we have more advanced controls. We have adaptive advanced controls. We develop it. Then we tested also the real-time optimization, never forgetting to produce what is needed and produce it in the most profitable way. In this case, it was around 60 variables. So let's see, 60 variables in a single board computer with 4DAC deployed in the hardware, no talk to IT people, okay? Directly communication with the PLC, and we have communication with Rockwell, Siemens, any Modbus, GE, ABB, okay? All blocks in 4DAC. And then we deploy it on the field and have the results, and we show the results of 50.31% in variability reduction, and 5.30% on fuel consumption, which is close to what we said to the client. It was 6%. So this client got with this project an ESG seal. They have some steps about it. So they have a goal for 2040, and they got it in 2021 because of our technology, among others, okay? But that's on the newspaper, okay? The implementation of process control in the tobacco dryer. Neutral carbon, okay? So the client tree, and the last use case we would like to present to you. This is a full historian system, very scalable, okay? It was built with the view of IT people. So we use Prometheus, which is something that IT people uses for observability. And I'm quite sure that this one is the most scalable technology for collecting data from industry that you're gonna see in the market with some different thing. We're gonna open it next month to open source, okay? Hopefully with Eclipse Foundation. And if you'd like to download it, it will be there for you, okay? Fully open source. So that's it. The world will need deep techs to bring science to next generation of industrial processes automation. That's what we are doing, and that's where we are winning, okay? We are very proud of what we are doing right now. We're growing by our own. We are bootstrapped. We have no investors, and we're doing this with open source. Thank you very much.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Reese, and I work for the Center for Breakthrough Medicines, and I am an automation nerd. So before I really get into things, how many people here work in the pharma industry? Okay, so there's a small handful out there. This is my first time at this conference, and I've always had the perception that pharma is behind technology speaking, and there's a number of reasons for that, but in talking to a lot of people who are in different industries here, what I'm finding is while at the micro level we're facing different challenges and problems, and of course we're subject to different regulatory bodies and have different documentation standards that we need to adhere to, the macro problems that we're facing are very, very similar. So there's a lot we can learn from one another, and that's been a huge takeaway from this conference. So I'm very pleased about that. So a little bit about Center for Breakthrough Medicines. We're a cell and gene therapy CDMO. I believe when we're completely up and running, we will have 700 square feet of facility, and we will be the largest in the world. We have 4 business units. We have our plasmids, viral vector, cell therapy, and testing. My role as a senior automation engineer there is to work on the data management systems and build that architecture, as well as work on the integration for cell therapy. My colleague, Mohammed Gala, is responsible for all of the other integrations into our automation systems that pour SAP. Sorry, I'm missing a slide there. It appeared to be blank. So what I was going to talk about here is a little bit more about our company. We offer a lot of different services within our company. Kind of what our mission is we noticed within the cell and gene therapy space that there's a lack of production facilities. So what we're trying to do is offer a comprehensive plan to give scientists who have an idea, who have something developed in a small scale, a platform to scale that up, help them with the process development, help with that scale up, tech transfer, and then bring it to manufacturing so that they can reach more patients. The unique thing about cell therapy is that a lot of our equipment you could literally put somebody's name on. We're helping individuals out there, and it's a very important mission, and we're really excited to be able to increase the capacity for production within the cell and gene therapy space. So this slide is one of my favorite slides, and this is how I kind of approach building a data management system. There's a lot of information here. If you want to talk about it afterwards, we can. I could do a dissertation on this and several lectures and write a book probably with what's here. But when it comes down to it, what we're trying to do is figure out what data do we have, what does our data mean, how is our data related, what can our data tell us, and how can we make our data work for us. Now, within the pharma industry, I think we have the first 2 down really well. I think within the third question there, the way we're answering that, we could do better. The fourth question, I'm beginning to question, are we approaching that sector correctly? Are we approaching MES correctly? Are we thinking about it in the right manner? Have we identified the correct problems? And I don't know that we've done a good job there. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement, especially with the advancements of technology. And then the fifth question there, I don't think the pharma industry is answering that at all. I don't think we're anywhere close to that, and I think it's because we're not deploying the correct technologies. So the way I applied these questions to developing our data management system and trying to build that architecture and fill out our data model is I developed a URS and tried to figure out, what is it we need to do? Because the cell and gene therapy space, it's very new to the industry. Whereas typical manufacturing, you have built data models already that you can apply to your manufacturing process and develop your batch records off of. But cell and gene therapy, it's kind of an unknown, and we're still trying to figure it out as we go. When I was brought into the company, we were still very, very early on. We were still under construction and developing our spaces, and the end business units didn't quite know how they wanted to operate yet. So with my experience, I could make a very good guess at what data we have. I can contextualize that pretty well. The second question, what does our data mean? That's more of an unknown. So I wrote our user requirements for the data management system based on capabilities. What do we need to do with our data? What are the asks that are gonna come later down the line, and how do we scale that appropriately over time and to a global organization? Because one of the limitations with cell and gene therapy is that we're not producing 1 million vials of something and shipping it out to the rest of the world. We're grabbing something from a patient, pulling it into our facility, doing magic to it, and then sending it back to the patient. And there's time limits involved in that. So we have to be very geographically close. So I have to develop a data management system that can operate at a global scale, which I don't think has really been done for, at least in the pharma industry. So after I developed that URS and I was happy with the capabilities that I was looking for, I moved to our functional requirements, where I laid out what is the technology we're going to need to put in place and what user requirements are going to be fulfilled with each one of those pieces of technology. So this is what I came up with. In working in conjunction with my boss, Andre Zabari, who's an absolute visionary in the field, please don't fire me, and my other colleague, Brian Martinez, who both fought very hard to help get us this tech stack in place. And they were both very instrumental in that. So this is a very simplified view of what's going on. It's a lot more complicated than this, but this helps you understand, generally what's going on. So at the bottom level, we have our raw data. We're using up to 22 epics and Rios for data collection, bringing that back into Ignition, utilizing UDTs to contextualize our data. We're using SparkPlug-B to transport that back to our enterprise data repository in our data center. And that's then being passed on to Canary, which is our historian system. And then we're using Ignition to get our data out to the end users in the way they need to. The other thing we have is a cloud system, and this is pretty unique to our business model. We have both the historian in the cloud and Ignition in the cloud for user interface. What the intent there is to have a global Canary system, to be a global historian system for our entire network of automation devices, while still having in each location a centralized Canary system for historization. The other thing that's very unique here with that cloud system, and one of the largest complaints that I've heard in the industry with CDMOs, is that CDMOs don't share the client data with the client, which kind of blew my mind. I didn't understand why we're doing that. And there's a lot of legal reasons why companies get nervous about sharing data out, because if you share one client's data with another client, that's a major issue. Utilizing the security and the additional metadata we can add, and the different factors involved within Canary and Ignition, we're able to very easily segregate data and provide access to clients to be able to see whatever type of reports and data they would like to see as part of their process to make sure everything's going fine within the facility. So pulling back a little bit and going into a little bit more detail about how we've developed this, the advantages that we're getting from utilizing MQTT are huge. I have a couple surprises in the next slide, which I'll go into a little bit more detail there, and I don't want to ruin them. But the ability to contextualize data down at the bottom level, right at the edge, is incredibly huge. And it's helped us out tremendously in transporting that data up in data association and within that respect. One of the other major advantages that we have of using the Opto22 as our edge device is we have Code Assist on there, so I have the ability to have a process control network already in place. As I said, we didn't really know what the end users were going to need when it came to what asks they were going to have. So I don't know what's going to be there, so I built everything in, essentially. So having that ability with the Opto22s at the edge for process control of a floor is a huge advantage. So here's some of the advantages that I've seen, and I try not to pull this out of a magazine or anything like that. I wanted to talk about the advantages that I personally experienced, a number of which came as a surprise as we began to implement things. So scalability is huge. Like I said, we have to have a global organization. We have to have a network, an automated network that is global, that's all talking to one another. I want to be able to develop a automated procedure in my facility, but a patient might need that in Japan. So I need to be able to send that automated code to that equipment and have it run there. So that's a huge advantage as far as scalability, you know, as well as the increased data integrity using MQTT and the different products we have, which are all completely integrated, which is great about these companies, is that they're all talking with one another. They're all trying to solve the same problem, and they're working together, which makes everything, you know, pair magnificently. It's very, very beneficial. You know, they integrate seamlessly with one another, which is magnificent. One of the other major advantages of utilizing MQTT and Sparkplug-B is the store forward capability. Recently, we did an update of our Canary system to a new version, which, by the way, took 10 minutes. I've never worked with a historian system you could update that effectively, that quickly. And as part of that, because of the store and forward capability, we had no data loss whatsoever. It just all backfilled after we were done doing the update, which was magnificent. We've also had some other issues. We have a significant portion of our facility which is under construction, and things happen under construction. For those of you who have worked in those environments, people cut wires, you know, fiber gets cut off, you know, power gets cut to certain areas and things like that. Store Forward has ensured that we don't have any data gaps in our GMP areas, which is extremely important, especially for regulatory reasons. So the next two are the big things. So everybody needs to wake up now. Because of the pre-contextualization of downstream, you know, we don't have to do tag additions at the historian level. And this has decreased our point deployment time by 95%. That's huge. So utilizing the Opto22s for data collection at the edge, contextualizing it within Ignition using UDT predefined classes and pre-qualified classes, and then using Sparkplug-B to transport that up to the broker, which publishes the information read by Canary, I don't have to do tag additions anymore. I just throw in that UDT, verify that it's communicating, and I'm done. I don't have to do any of that paperwork anymore. And for those of you in the pharma industry, like, you'll understand how big that is, you know, because there's a huge paperwork burden associated with QA and validation for pretty much everything you do. So that's a major money saver there. And then, of course, it's designed to handle, you know, high volume. So there's a lot of different types of data that we'll have. We'll have images, files, all kinds of different stuff. And the ability to keep the bandwidth low is very, very beneficial. So that's pretty much my presentation. That's our use case. I'm beginning to learn how important this deployment is, because this is the first of its kind that's been qualified in the pharma industry, to my knowledge. And you know, like I said, my colleagues have fought very hard to get this in place, and we're very proud of what we've built. So I hope that you guys can benefit from what we've done. I don't claim that we've done everything perfectly, but we've done the best we can, and we're looking for ways to improve it. And I found a host of ways at this conference thus far that I can take back and reevaluate some of the things we've done. So thank you very much for your time, and I very much appreciate being able to speak to you all.
I'd like to invite the speakers and the panelists to come and sit down here at the table, and I'll let them introduce themselves, but briefly I'd like to introduce them. This is Frederic Desbiens, who is the IoT and Edge Program Manager for the Eclipse Foundation. Alois. Michael Maxey is with Zedata, who's a sponsor of the ARC Forum. Zedata is I guess a venture stage firm, or very, very happily well-invested venture stage firm that is a key contributor to an open source edge application, edge platform called Project Eve that's run by the LF Edge, part of the Linux Foundation. And they commercialize a management and visibility and platform for that edge platform. I have, next to Michael is Valerie Viatkin, who is a professor at Aalto University in Finland. Valerie is one of the global experts on IEC 61499. In fact, I think both Valerie and Alois were using 61499 way before it was cool. So if the ceiling falls in here, we're going to lose a lot of the global expertise in that field. And finally, last but not least, John Conway, who's with universalautomation.org. They are also a sponsor, so you can see them in the showcase. They are a shared source organization that's working on a standardized runtime software environment for industrial automation. And he can talk about that some more. So that's the rationale for having these folks there. And I'll let them introduce themselves, but maybe I just did. So you're able to add, embellish or add to that as you wish, but I wanted to start with John, if that's okay. To maybe explain your organization a little bit, because you have a different kind of model than we saw, and talk about your organization and what you're doing and how it relates to these other technologies. And please speak right into the microphone so we capture the audio.
Sure, thanks, Howie. Hi, everybody. So yes, universalautomation.org, it's a non-profit association managing an implementation of the runtime execution engine of the IEC 64099 standard. Its members consist of users of automation technology and also vendors of automation technology, and they manage together a shared source implementation of this runtime. So it's not open source, it's shared source. So essentially, anyone can join and get access to the source code of the runtime. But there are specific licensing conditions and IP policy. In simple terms, in the license conditions, we want to ensure that there is one agreed version of the execution engine. So in fact, if members want to contribute and modify the source code, they have to agree that with the other members, okay? And we're doing that to maintain portability and interoperability of automation applets across the different vendor platforms. And then the IP policy, it's kind of similar to the OPC Foundation IP policy, where if members contribute IP to the runtime execution engine, they also provide a royalty-free license and the rights to the other members to use that contribution. So it's a protection for all the members.
Okay, can you, John, if I follow up with a question on that, can you talk about the relationship or future relationships between the Eclipse 40X and your runtime?
Sure, yeah. To be very clear, the universalautomation.org is just managing the runtime execution engine that runs in the device. That could be a controller, a PLC, an IPC, or it could be a containerized version of the runtime. We're just providing an industrial-grade runtime to the industry, okay? And we will support other IDEs if they want to deploy to that runtime. So we've had some discussions with Alois about how to do that. There are technical scenarios to make that happen. There are no particular barriers. It's just a question of getting funding for the 4DIAG project to actually be able to deploy from the 4DIAG environment to the Universal Automation Runtime.
Well, that got Frederick's attention. I think you're talking about getting some funding. I think he'd be interested. I would go to the other end of the table a little bit and ask Michael to talk about kind of your firm's relationship with open source and your business model, and give people a little perspective from your firm, Michael Maxey, if that's okay.
Sure.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. Michael Maxey here. Where's the data? We do edge orchestration and management. So what that means is we help our customers deploy workloads to the edge. And at its core, we have an open source project called EVE. EVE stands for Edge Virtualization Engine, so lots of acronyms at this show. And our business you could describe as an open core model. If you're familiar with the open source space, what that means is we have an open core, meaning part of our solution is open source. It's governed by the Linux Foundation. Anyone can come in and contribute to it. It's licensed under the Apache license, which is very similar to the Eclipse license, which means you can pick it up and put it in products and use it, et cetera. But our model is open core, so we have a commercial solution that leverages that open core piece to do basically infrastructure automation.
Okay, thank you. And Frederick, I'll turn to you now. Frederick has just written a book, or his book has just been published, but Frederick, I'd ask you to kind of introduce not just your book, but the role of the Eclipse Foundation, and especially in the industrial space.
Of course. Hello, everyone. So let's take care of the book first. So Harry was mentioning that it's hard to navigate the open source ecosystem and figure out where the projects fit and all of that. The goal of this book was literally to do that for the Eclipse ecosystem and a bit beyond. I learned from Michael that I'm the first one writing about Project Eve, so Project Eve is covered in this book as well. So enough. Now, yeah, exactly. Now, the Eclipse Foundation is a non-profit organization similar to the Apache Foundation or the Linux Foundation. And really, we are member funded. So our members pool resources together so that we can offer build infrastructure and other resources to our open source projects. Now, a few of those projects you heard about this morning, so Eclipse 4DIAC, which existed before even the Eclipse Foundation in some sort. I mean, it's been around for quite a while. And the Sparklog specification, where essentially it was contributed by Cirrus Link, created by Alan Nipper and his team, and now adopted by our members in the Sparklog working group, so Opto22, Canary Labs, Inductive Automation, of course, Cirrus Link themselves, and even we have a member there, which is Chevron, so you saw probably Todd Ensinger at this conference. And all of those people come together to really drive the Sparklog specification forward in an open and transparent manner. And what that means is that I'm there as, the arbitrator or the helper to maintain a level playing field among all of those contributors. So we own the trademarks to Sparklog, we own the intellectual property, on the behalf of the community, so that no one can, run away with it and do something which wouldn't be open, transparent, and run in an open source way.
Okay, thank you, Frederick. And now I'll turn to Valerie. As I said, between Valerie and Alois, I think we have most of the academic expertise, or a lot of it, in the world right here at this table. And I don't have a specific question for you, Valerie, but I would like you to maybe share what you're taking away from this conference and your experience in both the academic and industrial space.
Okay, thank you, Harry. Valerie Watkins here. I'm professor at Aalto University in Finland and also at Luleå University of Technology in Sweden. And in our work, we are trying in research to investigate enablers for specifically for flexibility in different industries. And we selected very niche technologies. One of these is a modular software design based on IEC 61499. And another is the use of wireless communication at the factory floor. And we're trying to combine these two things. And I must admit that I totally admire Alois's effort in the 4DIAC open source development, especially admire persistence. So you are doing that for a long time and it starts showing great results. And that's really great development. I must say that open source often can be perceived from industry perspective as unreliable kind of software source. But on the other hand, our observation is that we suffer with software anyway. The commercial software or open source software, it's all sources of pain. And users are fighting with that and overcoming the troubles and coming to some fruitful results after some time. So from that perspective, open source, I think, is a great thing. Of course, there are many questions which I would like to discuss if there is an opportunity how to transition from open source to like sustainable industrial, especially in the area of industrial automation. That's where we are all concerned about dependability. Okay,
that's an excellent question. I wonder if anyone on the panel has an opinion there they'd like to raise at this point. That's about a transition. I know, Michael, your firm has a model for that. Anybody else want to, no, Alice, go ahead. You'll need a microphone.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most crucial questions in open source in general. I'm reading a lot about that, seeing what other companies are doing. Your model with open core, I think it's called. Yep. Yeah, is a very good one. Also a dangerous one, but one of the better ones.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt and say I'm really not familiar with that model. I'm sure there are probably other people in the room. So explain what that
please,
model is.
It's a good idea. Yeah.
Okay, sure. So the general idea is you have a core of technology that's in open source, right? Linux distributions will do that. Let me use an example that maybe everyone understands, right? So you take the Linux kernel that's maintained by linux.org, and then you add value-added features around it. So Red Hat Enterprise Linux, right? They put federal STIG, they do all sorts of value add around that open core piece. But the base piece is open source. And in theory, anyone on the planet can pull that same core and go build another distribution very similar to Red Hat, which other vendors may or may not have done. So our model is very similar. We have a core that's in Eve. We like to think of it as sort of a standard for the way to orchestrate applications on edge nodes. Anybody can pick up Eve and start to use a controller. We actually have an open source controller component as well, and kind of build edge orchestration. But we also have a commercial version where we've spent a lot of time with our customers kind of building robust and dealing with networks and dealing with enterprise compliance and high availability and security and all of these things that are the sort of value add around open core that people tend to pay for. So open core is the core is open, the outside of it is proprietary, and together it's a combined solution for an enterprise.
Okay, thank you. That's a very clear explanation. I appreciate it. Now we'll go back to Alice, and you said you thought it was a little dangerous or something.
It can be dangerous, but this is not for that podium. For both sides, for the company as well as for the open source part. What you answered is very nicely also partly answering Valeri's question, because in that sense, with this model, you can ensure that we get the open innovation of open source. And at the same time, industry gets a tested, validated platform and an entity to go to for service requests, for reliability and all these things. And this is, I think, the model that works best. So with Fortiac, we are definitely not there. I think universal automation does that with the shared source model as well, because universal automation gives some guarantees to my understanding how the runtime will behave. Especially changes have to be validated and things like that. There are test procedures for the runtime in place. And therefore, this gives then exactly that what the industry needs. We get to say the best of both worlds is to have the open innovation, the advantages of open source. And on the other side, also the testability, the quality of service that you expect from a commercial product.
Okay, Frederick?
And this highlights this conversation something really important. Not all open source is the same in the sense that you can pick up a random library on GitHub. What's the quality of that? How's the IP in that? You have no idea. And you're betting on that maybe, or not. You shouldn't. Now, at the other end, you have organizations like the Eclipse Foundation, the Linux Foundation, Apache, and many others, and even yours that I didn't know about, but we should talk, certainly. In any case, I can highlight the difference by highlighting what we've done with Sparkplug specifically. So some people have been saying Sparkplug doesn't move fast enough. What have you been doing for the last 2 years? Well, for the last 2 years, the Sparkplug gang has been busy doing two very important things for the technology. One is writing an open source technology compatibility kit that anyone can download to validate their implementation. And the second is to have a fully featured, feature-complete open source implementation of the spec to go alongside that. So now when you go in the market and build those official Sparkplug compatible products on our website, from HiveMQ, Opto, CirrusLink, Inductive, and many others to come, you have the certitude that they interoperate, but not only that, you have the certitude that everything is okay from an IP perspective. So if you want to jump into that market, you can pick up the open source implementation, adapt it to your product, and get into that market as well. And if you want the seal of approval, then you join the Eclipse Foundation and can join our logo program. It's as simple as that. And all of that is done in the open with open roadmaps and all of that. And it highlights all the difference between structured open source with a real governance, as you were highlighting, Harry, versus single vendor open source, which is better than nothing, but yeah, or random open source on GitHub. And those things are very different.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, in the time remaining, I'd like to open up the questions to the floor. I'm sure there's a number over here. There's a question from Dow over here. Alex will bring you a microphone, so.
While he's doing that, just to weigh in.
Go ahead.
Another really important consideration is the license. So when you're pulling something from Eclipse or often from like the Linux Foundation, it has a license that's designed for openness, but also for consumption. There are very extremes on these licenses. There's licenses where if you use the code, like everything that touches it becomes open source, which could be toxic for big companies that have proprietary IP. And then there's others where they're extremely forgiving and you can just sort of take it and complete it. So as you're sort of sussing out projects, don't overlook the license. That can be an important consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Cristobal Ruiz with Dow. I got two questions. The first question is just for the sake of clarifying the title of the presentation. Can you make a clear distinction between open standard and open source? Because I believe that these are two separate things that are worth pointing out. And then the second one is, what's your opinion whether or not open source could be a strategic advantage or competitive advantage for end users?
Okay. Who wants to dive into that?
I'm not afraid. So the first question, standardization versus open source, right? I think they're super connected. I think if you go back in time in the 80s and 90s, it was all standardization bodies. You'd have very big companies that would dedicate really smart CTO-style engineers to write these super long specs that then everyone would go implement. And standardization was something written that you had to implement. What you heard from the earlier presentations, they've all sort of followed that path, but they have a reference implementation. They have a binary you can run on Windows or a shared storage reference implementation. So to me, they're connected. And what you see, or what I've seen more on the cloud side of the world, is open source is becoming that standard. It's less about writing these lengthy documents and more about putting code out into the world to say, like, here's the right way to do X. And if enough people pile on and enough companies pile on, it becomes that standard and everybody builds on it. So I think they're very interconnected.
And I think I can speak to your second question, as I am a consumer of this. Having open source technology is very, very beneficial because I'm able to connect things a lot better. Within the pharma space, one of the things we fight with is the vendors and them building proprietary things. And it's very difficult to get data out of them. It's very difficult to connect it to the network. And we spend a lot of time trying to figure all that out, and we can never get everything off of it that we want. So having something that's an open source platform that can connect right into our tech stack, that we don't need to put much effort into, that very much increases our bottom line. I don't need to spend as much time integrating things. I can develop a standard that I can apply throughout my entire facility. So it's huge in that manner. I think within the industry, people hear open, and executives panic when they hear open because then well, is there a security issue there? And what we're seeing, especially with the technology that we've deployed in our tech stack, is we actually have better security, because we have more control over it. So it is a huge advantage.
Renato, I don't know if your presentation was kind of a case in point, I think, but would you like to comment on how you feel about that question?
Yes, of course. From my point of view, when you contract companies like mine using a lot of open source, what happens is that your digital transformation starts happening faster. So, as I told you, it wouldn't be possible to us to do what we do without open source. So if your digital transformation goes faster with us, then it's because open source. Then I believe this is strategy.
Okay. There's another question here.
I have two questions that are sort of related.
They can come in twos, but not threes.
I mean, so one is about the supply chain implications and risks of open source, and the other one is the upcoming CRA, the Cyber Resiliency Act in Europe, where there are all kinds of rules around paid services for open source software, right? I mean, around security. I want to know from the European guys, maybe, can you enlighten me a bit about what that really means? Because I read the draft, right? I mean, and I wonder how that would impact our decision as a big corporation to start using open source, right? Mainly for the supply chain risk, the Log4j kind of things we still have, right? And other stuff that we have. Any guidance?
Okay, so supply chain risk, and go ahead.
Yeah, of course, a secure supply chain is really important both for hardware and software, right? And this is why it's so important to take open source components with the proper governance. In fact, at this point in time, even considering all the commercial software in the world, 80 to 90% of all the code in the world is open source. Your iPhone is full of it, your Windows machine is full of it, okay? And those commercial players don't necessarily always give back to the open source communities, but some do. Anyway, the importance to know all that chain of dependencies for the open source components that you would use is really, really strategic from a security perspective. Because we've seen it with OpenSSL or Log4j, as you mentioned. Those were important dependency throughout the industry, but no one was investing enough to support them so that they would be secure over the long term. So part of our role at the Eclipse Foundation and the Linux Foundation is to support those open source projects like 4DIAC and the others. Try to find adopters for them and commercial users that will give back. And that's the thing. If you want, from a secure supply chain perspective, to be, in a good position, then there are two things you should do. First, you need to be aware of this chain of dependencies. And if your supplier is a commercial one, they should be able to tell you what's the bill of materials for their platform and give you the assurance that they maintain those dependencies and adopt the new releases with the security patches over time. And the second dimension is really to actively find ways to give back to the open source community. Because you can consume for free doesn't mean it's a good idea not to support it in some way. Maybe dedicate some of your developers to provide patches or even new features to project. Maybe it's by supporting a foundation like ours. There are many, many ways where you can do that, but if you don't, there will be another Log4j, there will be another OpenSSL, and you will be stuck scrambling. So why not invest 10K per year on an ongoing basis now, rather than lose 10 million because of a security breach in an important dependency? To me, it's a no-brainer, but I'm a bit biased.
One cliche I heard that I thought was very amusing is to think of open source not as free beer, but as free puppies.
But I love beer.
I like that a lot. I have to take that. I would like to add here to the comment, Log4j is just because it's open source, so you knew about it.
Yeah.
So if you have a commercial vendor, you don't know how many CVEs there are there. Maybe they even not tell you. So there is now there are studies on that open source will help you in that, because based on governments, on open communication, especially problems like Log4j, like other issues are much more openly communicated and also fixed faster. Maybe you already you still use some commercial tool that has Log4j with the buggy version inside. You may not even know. You are able to sue someone afterwards, but I'm not sure if this is what you want to have. So therefore, especially with all that things in an open, transparent way of communicating, a transparent software bill of materials with versions, everything documented, I think you are safer with an open source world. I'm again maybe biased here. And very important, open source is something where mostly about infrastructure, like with the open core module. So this is something that should not be forgotten here, especially in a setting like that. Also Harry presented it very nicely. Don't forget what is your asset, especially regarding software. It's the same with that guy here. He uses a lot of open source software. Nonetheless, he delivers value and he has a key asset he will never open source. And that's important when you use open source software. You have to think about what kind of open source software makes sense I would say, like a buy decision, and what things to do by yourself, and it is very clear, do a strategic decision here. This is important. That's very often forgotten.
Okay, other questions from the floor? We have a few minutes left. There's one in the back, Alex.
Hi, good morning. I'd like to ask the exact same question that he asked as his second question, which was, are there any comments or concerns about the EU's upcoming CRA Act?
Okay, well, it's good to have a European-based organization and some Europeans here, so.
Absolutely. So if you didn't know, the corporate entity for the Eclipse Foundation is based in Belgium. This enables us to participate in EU-funded research projects, but we are a global organization and always happy to visit the land of the free, of course. The Cyber Resiliency Act, for those of you who are not aware what we're talking about, is proposed legislation in the EU that would essentially boil down to this. To have a software release, you would have to get the CE seal, like you have on your phone or commercial products at home. You would need to pass very, very thorough audits about everything about the software release before being able to release it. So this impacts commercial vendors, of course, and this impacts open source organizations. They tried in the proposed legislation to carve an exception for open source, but their vision of open source in the way it's written is it's a random person writing code in their mom's basement. And, you know, looking at my own members in the room, there are plenty of good people that give back to the community, but are doing open source from a commercial perspective, and even, I mean, on this panel. And the thing is, if you require all of those things that are in the legislation from open source organizations, this means we would have to stop distributing binaries because there's no way we have the budget and staff to perform all of that on the behalf of our projects, and our projects wouldn't be able to do it on their own as well. So this is a massive risk right now, and of course we are coordinating with other organizations to push back. But if you are from a larger organization and you have a government relations team or something like that, please get informed, please jump in, because this will have an impact on you even if you are just in the US and targeting the US market. Your partners, your suppliers will be dealing with it. This will drive your costs up. This will be a mess for the whole industry. And if you are willing to learn a bit more about this from an open source perspective, our executive director, Mike Milinkovic, wrote a very detailed blog post recently in the last few weeks about this. So we can be in touch, and I will forward you the link.
Well, it's good to know that the EU Parliament is our Parliament in this country is not the only one that's barking mad.
I wouldn't dare comment on American politics.
No. Yeah, that's right.
You know, I'm a very bad Canadian socialist, of course.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I wish it was happy hour now after that comment, but it isn't. Does anyone else want to comment on that? I don't know if who's familiar with it. Okay, well, we'll pass on that. Are there any other questions from the floor? There's one in the back here. Boy, you ruined my day.
I'm really sorry about that. The good news is this is proposed legislation, so there is still time. However, measures a bit like that have been contemplated even in the U.S. Congress, so stay aware.
Okay.
The other thing is, and that's really important, is that even if we get it to change, you know, things will likely change in that space. And the intent of the legislation is good, but we need to pay attention as an industry.
Yeah, very good. Okay, the question in the back, sir.
Firstly, I wanted to say excellent presentations and discussion. This is really valuable, I think. Question around sort of the business models you guys spoke about a little bit, open core, open source. Something that I've seen some companies be hesitant about with directly adopting open source is the support model with that. So for better or for worse, you go to a commercial company and you have a single throat to choke, so to speak, if something goes wrong. With some of these more complex architectures, something like, probably Eric is aware of. I'm curious what your thoughts are on kind of a support model where you're giving the product away or having an open core that you're sort of making available freely and then charging for enterprise support. Curious if you have any feedback on that model.
Yeah, I don't know. Eric, do you have a comment on that? I would start maybe with an end user and again, you're kind of in a different situation, a unique situation, but what are your support
I'm using
issues?
this stuff while everybody else is thinking about it at a very high level. So it's something that I'm still trying to process through. So again, working in the farm industry, there's a huge burden of validation with anything that we put in place. But having said that, once we put something in place, it's very rare that we will change that in any major way. If I was to, and I've looked at this, specifically with Codesys, of looking at online libraries for different control modules and pulling those into our system to utilize with our equipment. In the event that I would do that, I would pull that in and I would validate that myself, and then that would be what I'm looking at, and I would kind of take that open source as a starting point and use that to build off of. That would give me a huge advantage, and that's where I see the benefit in open source among others. But yeah, I'm not, from my perspective, because I don't want to change things too much, like I said, I'm not looking too much for a support mechanism behind it. Now, that could be unique to my instance, again, because of my validation burden. So I don't know if anybody else has seen anything else in their use cases.
Go ahead, Renato.
Well, from the point of view of the business model to the final client, for example, when I embed a hardware with some kind of technology, I can use the business model that I'm renting the hardware. Okay, this is one business model that you can use. But you can also think about, for example, maybe it's easier to see, let's see, Spotify. Spotify is a software. And if you go to the license terms of Spotify, it's full of open source there. And you can see that Spotify is something like software as a service with the revenue model that you pay every month. Okay, so you can think about, I always try to look of some things that is already running to see the options that I have for the business model with my clients. So that's what I can tell you about business models.
Alois?
If there is still time, I would also add here. So I think it depends a little bit on use cases. So you've heard here now two different ways of using software. We have here Eric that is using it by himself, so pulling the software, putting it together. We have here a distribute, I would call it, taking existing open source software, packaging together, delivering value. And this depends also what you like to have. Are you building a product on top of open source? Then maybe it's more like Renato's case. Sorry, I'm super bad with names today. If you are a classic consumer, then I would see the Red Hat model. I think the Red Hat model is the most prominent one. So you go to Red Hat, say, I need a package with that kind of software. You make it correct, and I just get it, and you do 24/7 support and stuff like that. So, and for your case, it was the same. So we get here different kind of models, and this depends always on where is your use case, where is your value, what kind of software are you using? Are you building your own software? Do you need just software installed that is working? For example, we have a case where we have a user of Fortiac that is paying us to improve Fortiac. So they are paying a few of my PhD students and developers to extend publicly the open source code of Fortiac IDE, and this is also a business model. So they get a better tool, and for them the tool is just a medium to do stuff better. So, and therefore that's the problem with open source. It's not like a one-stop shop and it's one size fits all. It's not like you go to Microsoft, buy a Office 365 license and everyone is happy. It's always a case-by-case thing, I would say.
So, and to kind of add a little bit to my previous answer, you know, and thinking through a little bit, a lot of this stuff is very new to me. So I'm still trying to piece it together. I'm not going to claim I know everything because I don't. And there's a lot I've learned just in this conference that I want to take back. And one of the challenges that we're going to face in our business moving forward is how are we going to integrate all of our large-scale enterprise systems to develop a cohesive batch record, essentially, later down the line, and deal with problems like supply chain and having enough things on raw materials on staff and tracking patient info. Because, you know, again, what we're doing, we're taking something from the patient, processing it, and then giving it back to the patient. So the implementation of open source solutions that somebody else has developed, you know, taking two applications we have and connecting them together, you know, that's a huge time saver for us. In the event that there's, you know, we would like a support mechanism for that. That would be extremely beneficial for us from a company, you know, who is using open source technology and can maintain, you know, what they've developed on their own. I know that would go a huge way with management to really implement the larger scale things. So open source, there's several different ways that I can use it within my industry. One at the lower level for you know, putting all the process controls in place and developing that kind of coding and whatnot, but then at the larger scale, connecting various systems together that somebody else has already figured out. You know, I don't want to reinvent the wheel if somebody has done it better than I could. So in that event, to answer your question, it would be advantageous to have a support mechanism in place that's more formalized.
Maybe one comment that came, sorry, because this is very important. One chance of open source software is that you can very easily evaluate technology in an early stage. So you could go out and say, I would like to know how Sparklight works in a setup of mine. I don't need to go to 20 vendors. I just go and get me the reference implementation. I get the Eve open core, test it out, and then see where this goes from. So, and then for most of open source projects, there is sometimes not as easy to find people helping you later to do support. I guess, especially as open source for our kind of industry is still, I would call it rather new, the way how there will be more organizations building up support for that. I know that there is a division at Red Hat, sorry, and but stuff like that will come up.
Okay, I'm sorry to do this, but it is lunchtime, so I'm going to have to call the discussion to a halt. I have to go to another meeting. You can probably intercept some of these panelists on their way out, but I want to thank them very much for their contribution to this session. Thank you all.
Thank you.